All right, so this video is going to cover setting up your SD card as well as your config, the initial basic setup for edit mode, as well as for a few of the new features coming in ProffieOS 6 on my prop file. So first and foremost, we're going to take a look at the SD card to start. So now I do want to say all of this is optional. So if you're looking to use ProffieOS 6 with edit mode and my prop file, you're going to want to do these setups. If you're not wanting to use edit mode, if you're using a different prop file and you don't plan on using edit mode or any of the new functionality, then you don't have to make these changes. And while it may seem initially like there's a good amount of changes, they're all pretty straightforward. We just have to set things up a certain way to enable all the features of edit mode because obviously if you want to make things editable, they all have to be uniform. So that's where a lot of these changes are coming in. So kind of just a starting point from best practices. And this is more geared towards the new users, but also to installers. Is that when you first get your Proffie board, so if you're doing your own install, this is obviously kind of a straightforward given, but just to cover it, you're going to want to make a copy of your SD card, and that's going to include not only all of your fonts, so I'm going to go into here, and so you're going to want a copy of your SD card on your machine or somewhere back up, but you're going to want not only your fonts, but you're also going to want your config folder. Your config file. And the reason for this is actually going to be twofold. So having the initial config that's loaded on your Saber is very important already, but actually with edit mode in particular, the use of that config file is actually going to expand, and we'll go into that in a little bit. So first things first, you have your brand new Proffie board, whether it already has ProffieOS 6 on it or if it's an older version and you're going to be updating to ProffieOS 6, you're going to want to make a backup copy of everything on your SD. SD cards can go bad, they can get corrupted, they can, you can accidentally delete it. You want to have a backup somewhere. I always put mine in this folder on my machine so that I have them for each Saber, that way I can always come back to them. The other piece of this is these INI files and these temp files, some of which are new. These are where all the edit mode changes are actually being saved. So you're going to want to make copies of them anytime you do large edits, and we'll talk about that a little bit more down the line. But so have a backup copy. Now, for those of you who are brand new to Proffie, or for those of you who maybe haven't considered this, I recommend getting an SD card reader. I think I got one on Amazon for like 10 bucks or 8 bucks or something. You're going to want that. You can use the USB port on your Proffie board to write to the SD. I guess some chassis maybe make it impossible to get to the SD card, so you don't have another choice. If you have access to the SD card to remove it from the board, get an SD card reader. It just writes and reads a lot faster. If you're going through the USB port, which I actually never do, but I've been told it's extremely slow. So if that's your only option, it's still an option. If the Saber was set up to enable mass storage, you can get access to the SD card through the USB port on the board, but it's going to be really slow. My recommendation is if you can remove the SD card and get to it and be able to take it in and out, obviously without damaging things, get an external USB reader and use that to do your copying, your backups, and then adding or removing fonts. The other piece of the puzzle is whenever you do large changes to your SD, you're going to want to reformat it. And more importantly, whenever you have that SD card in an SD reader, be sure to eject it from your PC. So I've seen people post, and it's, just, I think it should be common knowledge, but it's not always recommended to everybody who's brand new, is that whenever you have an SD card that's recognized by your machine and you've made changes to it or you viewed it, you're going to want to eject that SD card from your PC before you actually physically remove it and put it back in your Saber. You can corrupt all the files on there. And then once obviously your SD card is corrupted, it's not going to work, and hopefully you've already backed it up and you'll have your backup, and you can fix that by reformatting and then copying everything back in, but always eject your SD card. So kind of public service announcements out of the way. There's a couple of changes coming to how you want to set up your SD card and or how you want to set up your fonts. Now, this video is going to be specific to what we need to do for edit mode and what we need to do for my prop file, primarily the track player. There are other things that you can do for Real Clash, for the dual mode sound. I've covered those in other videos. So this video is only for the edit mode stuff. If you're also going to use the new OS 6 features for a few other things, there's going to be separate videos on those. So the number one thing related particularly to the edit mode menu is going to be using the introduction of the common folder. So, and huge thanks to Brian Connor, No Sloppy. He's created a whole bunch of edit mode prompts, and this Dropbox link will be available in multiple locations for when you're getting started with OS 6. You can create your own sounds. That is all available. Actually, that's already in the wiki, so let's go to the ProffieOS wiki. So right now it doesn't have a main directory, so you're going to go to all wiki pages, and I'll put this link in the description too. And right here. So this is a list of all of the prompts and or sounds related to both edit mode, but also some of these are used in my prop file for OS 6. But Brian has created all of them, and he's actually done multiple languages. He took that upon himself. So there's big, obviously, if you're using these files, be sure to thank Brian. But in English in particular, he's actually made multiple voices. So these so you're going to want one of these. At the minimum, you're going to put the files you download. So whatever voice you choose, you're going to want all the files that are in here. So everything within this particular folder or whatever one you choose, you're going to want to put inside your common folder. So the common folder is going to be a fallback folder. So by default, both for my prop file and for the edit mode menu, you're going to want a common folder. It should be all lowercase this way, and it should be in the root directory of your SD card. And at a minimum, it should contain all the sounds that are either from Brian's files or that you've created yourself related to these prompts. The reason for this is if you happen to add a new font and that font doesn't contain these prompts, the OS is going to automatically append the font search path to look at common. So in order to prevent an instance where maybe you've made a change through edit mode or another method on the saber that loses the prompts, edit mode cannot run without these prompts. There is kind of there's a logical check in the system to make sure that we have a common folder before we start edit mode, but in order to absolutely be safe, we do have to have this common folder in place, and it should contain these. If you wanted to have different voices, because Brian's made a number of them, you can have one in your common folder as your fallback, and then you could put different, you could take each of these different versions he's made, the A, the B, the C, etc., and put them in individual font folders, and then that font would have its own voice, which is perfectly fine. The way font search paths work, which we'll show on the config, the common is only used if the files are missing. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to set up this common folder in your root directory, and you're going to pick one of your voice things or make your own that has all the prompts. You're going to need all of them, and put that on your SD card for all the sabers that are going to run OS 6 with my prop. Again, this is optional if you're not using my prop, or if you don't plan on using any of the features that require it, you can get away without it, but pretty much my prop file for OS 6 and using edit mode's menu will require this. The other piece on your fonts is we are going to be, and this is both for edit mode and also for track player on my prop file, you're going to be putting your tracks within the font. So every font should have a track folder. Now, a lot of the fonts that I get nowadays already have this. They already have the tracks folder in them, but it's kind of twofold. If you want to use the edit track feature in edit mode, it only looks within the current active font and or common. So the old method that most people would do is they would put a tracks folder in your root menu. As you can see, I don't have that anymore. What you're going to do, if you had tracks that you wanted for every single font, you'll put them in your common folder, which is the second use of the common folder. But then if you have tracks that are specific to fonts, which I actually prefer, you're going to put a tracks folder within each font, and then obviously all the tracks in there. Now this is twofold. Edit mode's edit track capability, which edits the default track on any preset, only looks within the currently active font and or the common folder. Just because of the how it scans, and also trying to limit so that it's not running continuously trying to find files. It looks there. So for the edit mode feature using edit tracks, it's going to look within whatever font you currently have selected and or your common folder. So that's the first reason for it. The second reason is on my prop file, the track player only looks in the currently active font and or common folder for tracks to play. You still will be setting up, and this will be shown in the config, you're still setting up a default track. That default track will be the track that plays automatically when you use the track feature. But with track player, you'll actually be able to play all the tracks that are set up either in the font on a preset or the common folder, because we have it set up that way. So you'll want to put all your tracks in a track folder, and again, the tracks also should all be lowercase in this exact way, and then put all the track files into that folder for your specific fonts if they don't have them, or again, the common folder. Now, if you have a font that doesn't have a tracks folder and you have a common tracks folder, so common/tracks, those would be the tracks that are accessible for that preset. But so those are two kind of font changes that you're going to want for your SD card. Again, making a backup copy of your SD card, and then the other piece of it is backing up these INI files. So you're always going to want a copy of your config, and that should be your current config. Now, if you're getting this from an installer and your installer has not provided the current config, get it from them. I'm also going to make this, Frederick's already made this recommendation multiple times over, to all installers. When you're installing a Proffie board, you really need to put a copy of the original config on the SD card for your users. This is going to become exponentially more important with edit mode, because it's actually also a roadmap to using edit mode with some of the new structure that's coming. It's kind of like, it would be like not including the instruction manual with a product if you don't have that config file. You're still going to use your config file if you need to ever update the OS, so that's the first important thing. But using edit mode, there are certain features built into styles going forward where it's actually going to be really important that you have, that the end user has access to these. And we'll show that in a minute. The INI files are going to be on your SD card. So if you first get your SD card from an installer and it hasn't been edited in any way, using edit mode or using the ProffieOS Workbench, which we'll also touch on, there may not be any INI or temp files. That just means that the default config is running itself without any changes. But as soon as you make any changes via edit mode or via web USB, you're going to see a number of these INI and temp files in place. If for some reason these files are deleted from your SD card after you made a bunch of edits, your Saber will still run. It'll just run the default that was originally uploaded. It's kind of like a hard reset or a system restore. So if you ever want to just restore everything, you could purposefully delete these files. But that means all the edits you've made to everything will also be gone. So these files are what saves the changes you're making. And each individual change goes into a different place. That's all handled by edit mode or by ProffieOS Workbench. Used to be web USB. So if you make a ton of changes, so say you've got your Saber set up, you get the initial upload, you go into edit mode or through Workbench, you make a bunch of edits for colors, for fonts, styles, everything else. You're going to want to make a best practice again of taking a copy of these files from your SD card and backing them up also on your machine, because these are the saved changes you made. So if something does happen to your SD card and you lose these, you're starting at ground zero and you'll have to make the edits again. It's not overly difficult, but if you've got a lot of presets and you've customized every preset with a ton of colors and a ton of settings and different styles and font changes from what the original config was, you'll have to repeat that. So it's also best practice if you make a bunch of edits to save these INI and temp files to an external location. That way, if anything ever happens to your SD, reinstating these files will reinstate all those edits you've made. But so that's the SD. So it's a couple things. First and foremost, what you should be doing anyway, backing up your SD card right away, making sure you have a copy of your config, adding the comment folder. And again, the link to the sounds that Brian has provided for everybody will be in the description. There's also going to be a number of locations, including all the instructions and documentational references. And then adding your tracks to each font and or your comment folder so that those tracks are accessible for edit mode and for track player. The rest of the changes are all going to be in your config. And the documentation is going to go through these in a little more detail. I'm going to kind of just touch on the main ones. There is a particularly, again, related to my prop file, which is where a lot of these defines are coming in. There's a ton of customization. So the documentation as well as the upper portion of the prop file for OS6 will cover this in more detail, but this is kind of an example of a config. So a couple of new pieces. There's going to be a couple defined pieces. There's a couple of things to keep in mind when you're doing your config and or checking them as you go. And then a large portion is actually in how the styles are going to work now. So actual styles for edit mode will actually be a whole video series that I'll do down the line. There's a lot. And first of all, there's a ton of new features available. So there's a ton of new functions, transitions, style capabilities, plus all the new modifiers. So it's going to take a long time to go through all of that, as well as now all the edit mode arguments that make all the editing possible. So the actual specifics of that will be coming down the line once I get the library built out, once I get more everything fleshed out. But for our intent purposes, the first thing is going to be the particular defines. Now there's two very specific defines related to edit mode and the menu. That's these two here. So this first one, the FX263 edit mode menu, that activates the menu system. So if you don't want to use the edit mode menu on your Saber, and you have no plans to use it, you would not include that define. It's not automatic. By putting that define in, that will include the whole menu that runs edit mode. If you want, and along with that is this second one, enable all edit options. This sets your Saber up to be edited at a minimum. So there's a couple ways you're going to be able to edit everything. So the first one is obviously that edit mode menu, and that runs currently through my prop file. The plan will be at some point for the other prop files to add that capability to them. That's going to be up to each individual prop file maker to get that integrated. There's a lot required for that, so they may need time for that and figuring out the controls. But if you don't want to use the menu, you can still use all of the edit capabilities through ProffieOS Workbench, which is actually not, I thought I had that up, but I must have turned it off. Which the link will be in the description. So I don't have a Saber connector right now, but you actually have the ability to use the Workbench either through USB port, or if you have Bluetooth, you can use it through that. This gives you an online editing app, which does all the edit mode capabilities too. So Frederick's actually been working on this so that it syncs up to the edit mode menu built into my prop. So the two of them are complementary to each other. But if you don't want to have the menu on your Saber, if you don't want to run that functionality, you'll still be able to use pretty much all of edit mode through this interface. So you'll have that secondary option. So if you decide you want to just do it through the web USB or through, ProffieOS Workbench, you'll at a minimum have to add this define to enable the edit options. This allows for the editing to actually occur. And then again, for web USB, when you're on Arduino, you're going to also be choosing your serial plus web USB capability. And you can do this, so you can have the edit mode menu active and also use the Workbench. They work together. You can choose to just use the onboard menu, in which case you don't need this USB type plus web USB here. Or you can choose to not use the menu on your Saber and just do web USB. Which would then mean all the edits would only be made either connecting through to ProffieOS Workbench through USB, or if you have it a Bluetooth. So there's a lot of ways you can enable edit mode, but that's the minimum. So these two defines here are the minimum. The the other defines that you see here are, I'll go into more detail in the literature, um, and some of these are tied to other features, but those are the two that matter most. And obviously running my prop file currently, once the other prop files get the edit mode menu and the edit mode capabilities, we're able to do them. The use of gestures is still done by defines, but edit mode, if enabled, will actually let you toggle these on and off and do all these settings through either um, the edit menu or the ProffieOS Workbench. I still call it WebUSB, so it is the same thing. Now, the other couple of small pieces related to the config, particularly for the top, your volume that you set. This is going to be the max volume your saber will be able to run at. So this is on purpose. If you're an installer in particular, you usually want to set that so that somebody doesn't blow out their speaker. And if you're installing it yourself, you're going to want to set that. But once you've set that volume at this point and uploaded, edit mode can never go past that volume. You can obviously lower the volume, but the max volume is this setting. So keep that in mind. So if you start out with this set really low, you'll never be able to increase that volume through edit mode above that number. But that's kind of a fail safe to make sure you don't blow your speaker. Um, so this will always be the maximum volume set. And then related to edit blade length, which is part of the new capabilities of OS 6, you'll be able to edit your blade length again through the edit mode menu or through ProffieOS Workbench. But that uses a combination of two things. It's going to use, first and foremost, this number. If you don't have if you never are going to use a blade longer than 144 pixels, you don't have to touch this number. But if you've got like the V1 Proffie, the V1 KR sticks, obviously this number should be, I think, 264, 269 or something like that. So that's going to be different. Or if in the future you ever plan to use a blade longer than 144 pixels, you need to up that number here, because once this number is uploaded, you can never go above whatever the max is set. So this number relates to the bottom number. So then we're going to go to the very bottom of our config. And in when you're setting up your blades, this number becomes more important. Now, particularly for your primary blade or any blades that are, you would hope to replace in the future, this number becomes the maximum pixels possible. So what that means, so like in particular, this saber actually that I have right here, the Fallen saber, actually I'm using a 125 pixel blade that I built for it. The longest blade that I have is 136 pixels. So I purposely set this value to 136. This becomes the maximum length that blade can ever go. You can only ever reduce. So whatever you expect your longest blade to ever be, that's what should be here. If this is above the 144, then you obviously need to change that max number at the top of the config. If it's never going to be above 144, you would change this number here. If you're unsure, or if you're an installer, I would recommend doing 144 in both locations. And then the blade length itself, when you put the blade in, will be editable, and that's editable, again, through Edit Modes menu or through the ProffieOS Workbench if you have WebUSB enabled. For other things, basically, the edit blade length can edit any blade, which a blade in ProffieOS, for those who aren't familiar, is going to be a physical blade, accent LEDs, your crystal chamber, anything that has its own unique style is set up as a blade. Same thing applies to subblades. So say you have a saber that has a bunch of subblades. You can set the length of the blade that gets uploaded in this exact portion of your config is the max for each one of those blades. It can never go. You can never edit above that. You can only edit below that, down to a single pixel. You can never go below 1 pixel. If you have a blade like an accent that's a single pixel, you can't edit the length of that, because the minimum blade length is 1. Maximum blade length is going to be the value that's in here, and you can edit in between that. So if you're going to plan to have different size blades on your saber, and you want to use the edit mode capability to edit that blade length on the fly or via the ProffieOS Workbench, set the maximum length into each one of these. So in this particular saber, I have 6 accent pixels, and I have my main blade. Like I said, my main blade Actually on the sabers are 125 pixels, but I know my longest blade that I would ever stick in this is 136, so that's why I'm setting it. If you're not sure, just default to 144. That's a pretty long blade. So expectation would be that's a good value. Again, unless you ever are going to use those V1 pixel sticks from KR, those are kind of an anomaly. They're their own thing. Obviously, the instructions for those would apply, and you'd have to set this up to be the 264, 269, or whatever the value is going to be. But that's the other piece in prepping your config is if you want to use that blade length, you can never go above whatever the individual blade's length is. Um, so that's the two important pieces. Clash threshold is editable, so it doesn't really matter what you set, although if you set this too low, even going into edit mode, you'll get false clashes until edit mode gets to activate, in which case it deactivates effects. But you don't want to necessarily set this too low, but if you're unsure, you could start at a kind of a higher number and you can use edit mode to pull that value down through testing. So clash threshold is also editable, but setting it up doesn't change. So this is the exact same way you set it up in the past. It's just now um, you can edit this value. Again, if you have edit options, enable all edit options defined. If you don't, you're stuck with it. Um, and now the other piece of this, and this is where this is going to be mostly tied to the library, but my hope is that other installers and anybody making styles will follow suit because we're adding so much capability to edit mode, to ProffieOS 6. This kind of a syntax, I've seen it in some forms in other places, but hopefully it gets more popular. But the library is going to handle this for those of you who are going to be using the library for OS 6. So still have a lot of work to do on it. It's not available yet, but the plan will be for this. So the setup for your presets, we talked about this in the SD card setup, is going to be this exact format. And the reason for this, so it's your font, semicolon, and then common. The reason for this, and this is automatic if you use edit mode or ProffieOS Workbench, is that common folder is a fallback. It's to make sure that the prompts are available for edit mode to run and a few other features to run. If you in the past have used font search paths and you've done multiple font search paths, you'll have to adjust because the new format is primary font, common, all uses. Again, if you're planning on using edit mode in my prop file, if you're using your own prop, if you're doing something else, this isn't the same. But if you plan to use edit mode, if you plan to use ProffieOS Workbench, or if you plan to use my prop file, this is the new required format. You're going to set your font. Now, fonts are completely editable. Edit mode and ProffieOS Workbench, you can toggle fonts anytime you want, but it only toggles the first value. This common folder remains untouched at all times. Again, fallback. The other piece is the track. So it depends on how you used to set up, but now you're going to obviously want to go font directory, tracks, and then this is your default track. And this track is editable. This is what plays automatically when you do just a simple track. If you use track player, it will let you see all tracks within this folder, or as I said, in the common folder if there's a tracks folder. It won't look at the root directory. So if you have a tracks folder in the root directory of the S key card, that folder isn't really used. You could technically just point to a specific track if you wanted to, but as soon as you go into edit mode, that track string will get cut and you'll use the font search path. So this will be your preset, and then here comes the new stuff. So this is these instructions essentially right here. This is going to be appended automatically by the library. The reason for that, and there'll be a lot more discussion on styles in the future, and particularly when setting up the style. So I don't want to go too far down that path because it's a huge can of worms. But the style options, and so you see style options here. This particular style will be in the library, and what style options are is it actually lets you have a single style run many different ways. So that's where this comes into play, because when you're in edit mode or when you're using ProffieOS Workbench, knowing the option number is going to be very important. This is why that's why you're going to need a backup of your config, because if you're unsure of a specific style you're trying to get, This is your basically your receipt, and then also for you to be able to match everything up. So by automatically, all values of 0 are defaults. So anytime it says option 0, that's going to be the default value for whatever the option is. And then you can actually have as many options as you want, and they're numerically activated. So if you're running this particular style and you run it in default, what this style runs at is the color mix that runs it. And this can vary by style. Some styles will have different color mixes, some will have different speeds, some will have different effects. It's essentially actually an open-ended capability. That's why having this documented is going to be important. But default 0 will run the base color plus a 50% base color mix to create the effect you see. If you switch it to option 1, and again, this will be either through the menu or through the workbench, it'll actually use the base color and an alt color, which are two individual colors you can actually set, so that you can make changes there. And then obviously 2 and 3 are different mixes. So 50% base color plus base color basically inverts the first or option 0, and number 3 inverts option 1. But what that does is you actually get the effect will actually look differently depending on which option's running. And then obviously the color mixes, you can change each of those colors based on alt individually to really get more unique stuff. So that's kind of what is coming with OS 6, is that a single preset, the styles within that preset can actually be used exponential times over to create completely new presets, and how it's controlled is via these options as well as all the color editing. And then same thing, your ignition, your power up, your retraction, your cool down, preons, swing, and a bunch of other stuff. There are actually going to be multiple options built in, and you'll just toggle them. So you can actually take this style and use option 0 for 1, and then have the ignition be option 0, which is standard ignition, and then have power up be disabled, just means no power up effects, and then all these other ones. And these are all also going to be completely customizable, but all of these values, so default 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in this case, these all correspond to what this style will do in that preset, and you can have it used many times over. So anybody wants to do the math on combinations, a single style uploaded to a single preset being used through edit mode or ProffieOS Workbench is basically going to have X number of options applied to it, where you can mix and match those options X number of times over, and you get multiple. So you can get into I think, what is it? So it'd be 4 style options times 5 ignition effects times 3 power effects times 5 or 6 retraction effects times. So all of a sudden you keep multiplying those out, and that's how many different ways that style can actually be used within your saber for different presets. But we'll get into all the style stuff on a separate video, because that is going to be actually several long conversations. But this is going to be another important piece, why you want to have that config file backed up, why you want to have access to the config file, because when you're doing your edits, these numbers now become very important for you to know what you're actually choosing. Obviously, you'll see them on the saber, but some of these effects in particular, knowing the difference between them, it's going to be a lot easier. So this capability here is coming with the ProffieOS6 library, and then, like I said, I hope other installers and stock creators follow suit in keeping track of what the options are. So those are your main setup things. There will be a lot of other videos coming. There's going to be a completely separate video on how to use edit mode itself, as well as how to use ProffieOS Workbench. But this is the kind of the first piece. So you have to get your SD card backed up, get your SD card set up, as we discussed, and then you're going to want to get your config set up. And then the styles that are coming in the OS6 library, they will contain all the necessary components to make edit mode work. That'll be a whole other conversation, but that is basically how we're getting ready for edit mode. So there's a lot more coming. I'm putting all the pieces together, and should be having some alpha testing kicking off in the near future, and that's why this is important. So hopefully everybody's excited for edit mode, and this helps you all get ready. So a lot more coming, but hope you enjoy.